To this special edition of Vantage, we are coming to you live from the White House. It's around 10:30 a.m. here, a bright and sunny day, which is good news because Americans are voting today. We caught some glimpses on our way here, voters lining up to elect their next president. It's all up to them now. No more rallies or campaign ads. It's all about the voters' choice. And who will they pick? Kamala Harris or Donald Trump? That's the big suspense. I know the question is on everyone's mind. When will we know the result? Well, if all goes to plan, maybe even tonight. Polls close at different times in different states because of different time zones in the US. It starts with 7 p.m. in Georgia, goes all the way up to midnight in Alaska. In 2008, 2012 and 2016, we got the results a few hours after polls closed. But nowadays, early voting is big, so it takes more time to count votes and declare the winner. In 2020, it took more than 3 days. We'll be tracking all the results here on First Post, so make sure you stay tuned to our non-stop coverage. We have a lot lined up for you on the show as well. First, a deep dive into the two candidates. What do Trump and Harris stand for? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Then a ground report on the role of Indian Americans. They are not just a key voting bloc. A lot of Indian Americans are also on the ballot. We'll introduce them. And how will the Gaza war impact the results? We spoke to Arab Americans to find out. And which way will the swing states swing on election day? All this and more lined up for you. First, the headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi condemns the attack on a Hindu temple in Canada, also slams the attempts to intimidate Indian diplomats there. Prime Minister Modi says he expects the Trudeau government to ensure justice. The condemnation by the Indian Prime Minister comes after pro-Khalistan extremists attacked a temple in Brampton on Sunday. North Korea fires a salvo of short-range ballistic missiles. It's Pyongyang's second launch in days. Last week, it had test-fired an intercontinental ballistic missile. On Sunday, South Korea, Japan and the US conducted joint air drills. Pyongyang says its latest launch is in response to the trilateral aerial exercises. Iran has the right to legitimate defense, says the country's foreign minister, but claims that Tehran does not seek an escalation. Iran has vowed to respond to last month's strikes by Israel on its military sites. Israel's attack was in retaliation for the Iranian missile barrage on 1st October. The Maldives recalls its top diplomat in Pakistan after he held an unauthorized meeting with a Taliban envoy in Islamabad. The Foreign Ministry of the Maldives says appropriate action has been taken. The diplomat's name has been removed from the website of the Maldives mission in Islamabad. Qatar votes in a referendum on scrapping legislative polls. In 2021, the Gulf state organized its first elections, but the polls prompted division as only certain Qataris were eligible to vote. Last October, Qatar's emir proposed the constitutional changes. Today's referendum is the first in the gas-rich country in more than 20 years. Nothing beats election day, whether it's India or the United States or anywhere in the world for that matter. The nervousness, the hope, the suspense. It's the purest and simplest expression of freedom, of democracy. Today is that day in America. Polls are open across the country. Americans are lining up eagerly to vote. Around 81 million people have voted early this time, meaning they voted before election day through postal ballots. 81 million Americans have done that. Chances are an equal number will vote in person today. Now turnout is typically low in the US. It's often between 50 and 60%. The last election in 2020 actually set a record, 66%, which was the highest since the year 1900. Let's see how it goes this time. I know all the stories are about Harris and Trump, but that's not the only race today. 34 seats in the US Senate are up for grabs. So are 400 plus seats in the House of Representatives. So voters are not just electing their next president, they're also electing members of Congress. Basically multiple elections on the same day. Also, fun fact, people don't vote directly for the president, they vote for state electors. These electors together make up what is called the Electoral College. And the numbers vary from state to state. For example, Florida has 30 votes, Michigan has 15. Pennsylvania has 19 votes and so on. All these votes add up to 538. If you win a state, you win all of its electoral votes. The halfway mark in this election is 270. Once you reach that mark, you're president. As we speak, all 50 states are voting. Most of them have long-standing party loyalties, like California, which votes for Democrats. It's called a blue state. Or Texas, which is always Republican, so it's called a red state. These results are never in doubt, so it all comes down to the swing states, states that can change hands from election to election. This time there are 7 of them, and we're talking about a big country here. It's spread across 6 different time zones. So the logistics are complicated. You also have long-standing traditions associated with voting. As always, a town in New Hampshire kicked things off. They don't wait till morning. They begin voting at midnight. This town has just 6 registered voters, just 6 voters. So the whole thing was over quickly. 3 people voted for Harris. The remaining 3 voted for Trump. Even Stephen, much like the national polls. Right now the focus is on peaceful voting. A lot of states are worried about political violence. 19 of them have put the National Guard on standby. In Nevada, counting centers have been fenced. In Arizona, drones and snipers are on alert. Can you imagine that? Snipers on election duty. It tells you how tense these battles are. A lot of Americans just want to be done with it, it seems. The constant ads, the threats and added security, the polarization, all of it has overwhelmed voters. But I'm afraid there is no quick end. Normally, the results are declared a few hours after the polls close. The timing depends on where you live. In Georgia, polls close at 7 p.m. In North Carolina, they close at 7:30. In Pennsylvania, 8 p.m. all the way up to 11 p.m. in California and Oregon. But don't worry, you don't have to track all of them. For example, California may stop polling at 11 p.m., but everyone knows that Harris will win it. So the focus is mainly on the swing states, the 7 swing states, and they too have different timings. In Georgia, officials say 75% of the votes will be counted in the first 2 hours. So expect quick results there. But in Pennsylvania, it is expected to take 24 hours. Even more if the vote is close. The winner must have a lead of more than 0.5%. If not, there will be automatic recounting. In Michigan, counting is already underway. These are early mail-in ballots, but the final results are expected only tomorrow. Wisconsin is same, and so is Arizona. If the race is close, we may see legal challenges as well, maybe even recounts, in which case more time will be lost. So here's the bottom line. If the verdict is decisive, we may see a clear indication tonight. But if the race is tight, as the polls indicate it will be, get ready for a long week. We saw that in 2020. The election happened on Tuesday, but Biden was declared a winner only on Saturday, which raises another question. Who decides the winner? Interestingly, it's the US media. Back home in India, we have an election commission. They tabulate and declare winners. But here in the US, there is no such body. Each state and each county has its own election officials and its own rules. These officials count and release tallies. Most media agencies have their own election team. These employees scan through the incoming voting tallies, and they don't just look at the raw numbers. They look at the demography, the type of ballot, past voting patterns, and the number of uncounted votes. Based on all of this, they declare winners in each state. The Associated Press is considered the best in town. They began calling elections way back in 1848. Let's see what's in store this time. Also, what are the candidates up to? Kamala Harris spent election eve in Pennsylvania. Her final rally was in Philadelphia. She summoned all her celebrity supporters for this. Oprah Winfrey, Lady Gaga, Katy Perry, all of them stood alongside Kamala Harris. The vice president stuck to her months-long message. She talked about hope and freedom.
Generations of Americans before us led the fight for freedom. And now, the baton is in our hands. And to everyone who continues to pour so much of yourselves into this campaign as an extension of your love for our country, I thank you for your time, your effort, and the heart you are putting into this.
These final rallies are not about policies, they're about energy. You need to push your supporters to the polling booth. It's as simple as that. And that's what Harris did. She visited a Puerto Rican restaurant in Pennsylvania. She also visited some voters in their homes. Take a look at this.
Welcome back.
Good to see you. How have you been? Okay,
Sweet plantains, you got it.
Yeah, okay, I'll have sweet plantains. I want the cassava, the yellow rice, and the pork. That's what I'll have.
I love meeting.
Donald Trump chose a different strategy. He hammered down on policies. Trump's final rally was in the swing state of Michigan. Before that, he too was in Pennsylvania. Trump played his usual hits on immigration and tariffs, sometimes with sharp rhetoric.
And on day one, I will launch the largest deportation program of criminals in American history. We're going to get them out. We have to. And I'm hereby calling for the death penalty for any migrant that kills an American citizen or a law enforcement officer.
No Trump rally is complete without some fun, though. We saw that in Michigan, where Trump compared himself to some historical figures like Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill.
And I said to them, does that mean I'm better than Abraham Lincoln and George? What? Yes, sir, you're better than both of them. No, when Winston Churchill, who was a great speaker, he was actually a stutterer, a tremendous stutterer, and he became one of the greatest orators. But when Winston Churchill made a mistake, he didn't go, excuse me, and go back.
For Trump, this was a big night, his last presidential campaign. If he wins again, it would be his last term. If he loses, he will be 82 by the next election cycle. Chances are the party would have moved on by then. But Trump fired a parting shot at his successor too. He said the Republican nominee in 2028 would struggle to fill a ballroom, let alone a stadium. I guess that's Donald Trump for you, as competitive as ever. Of course, it's all up to the voters now. Both candidates have returned to their home base. Trump is hosting an election party in Florida. Meanwhile, Harris is back here in D.C. She's hosting a party at Harvard University. The whole world will be watching the results eagerly, and we'll be right here tracking every update for you. This is a very close race. It will go down to the wire, and it will be settled in the swing states. As we told you before, America has blue, red and swing states. Blue states vote for Democrats, red vote for Republicans, and the swing states can swing either way, meaning they can vote for Republicans or Democrats. In this election, there are 7 swing states. They will decide who becomes president. So which way are they swinging on voting day? Let's look at them one by one. First up is Arizona. It has 11 electoral votes. Since the year 1950, Arizona has predominantly voted for the Republicans. Then why is it a swing state? Because it has flipped twice. Once in 1996 and then in 2020. Joe Biden won the state by less than half a point. But this time Kamala Harris is trailing here. Donald Trump is up by nearly 3 points. So Arizona does not look too good for the Democrats. Next is Georgia, another critical battleground. It has 16 electoral votes. Since 1996, Republicans held the state. Biden flipped it in 2020. Again by quite a narrow margin, just 0.2%. Trump has been leading here too. He was up by 1.8 points. But on Sunday, a new poll gave the Democrats some confidence. It gave Harris a 1-point edge. Then comes Michigan with 15 electoral votes. In 2016, Trump won the state by less than 11,000 votes. In 2020, Biden flipped it back. So what will it be this year? Right now, Harris is in the lead in Michigan. She is up almost 2 points, but Trump could catch up. The next one is Nevada, the smallest of all the 7 swing states. It has only 6 electoral votes. It's voted for Democrats since Barack Obama. Harris is leading in Nevada by 3 points, but Trump is slowly gaining 2. Fifth on the list is North Carolina with 16 electoral votes. Obama won the state in 2008. Since then, no Democrat has. So Harris has an uphill task. She wants to flip it back to blue. Right now, she's leading by 3 points in the state. Trump, too, has campaigned hard in North Carolina. Then there's Wisconsin. It has 10 electoral votes. In 2016, it voted for Trump. In 2020, it voted for Joe Biden. What will it be this time? Harris is leading here by 2 points, but it's a very close battle. If Harris loses Wisconsin, things could be difficult for her. And finally, we have our last swing state, Pennsylvania, with 19 electoral votes. And this is where the battle comes down to. Whoever wins Pennsylvania is most likely to win this election. Right now, this battle is tied. Candidates have campaigned here for days. They've spent millions on rallies, on political ads, on canvassing. Trump even survived an assassination attempt here. Will that give him an edge? I'm sure he's hoping it does. So let's look at the path to victory now. What will each candidate need to get there? The United States, as we've been telling you, has 538 electoral votes. A candidate needs 270 or more to win, and that's the magic number, 270 votes. So what's the path to 270? How do you get there? Let's look at Donald Trump first. Assuming that he wins all the red states, he will have 219 votes, in which case he needs 51 more to hit 270. And what's the best path for him to get that number? Well, his first choice is North Carolina. He won it in 2016, then again in 2020. If he holds on to it again, that's 16 votes right there. If he flips Georgia back, that's another 16 votes. And then if he wins Pennsylvania, he will be comfortably at 270. He won't need any other battleground states. Then there's Kamala Harris. If she wins all the blue states, she will be at 226 votes, so she needs 44 more. Her best option is the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Biden won all of them in 2020. If Harris holds them, she will reach 270. Of course, this is optimistic. Harris and Trump are neck and neck in Pennsylvania, so it's a 50% chance. There's a 50% chance of Harris losing that state. What's her way then? Well, her other two options are North Carolina and Nevada. Both will get her above 270 without Pennsylvania. Again, that's a long stretch. So the road to 270 is a difficult one, but for both candidates, it passes through these swing states. They will choose who becomes America's next president. Today, as voters head to polling booths to decide who will be the next president, their decision is going to be based on a lot of things: political leanings, issues, policies, but more than anything else perhaps, what matters is a voter's perception of the candidate, which is shaped over months of campaigning. So let's take a closer look at how each candidate fared in this election, a SWOT analysis, if you will, of their presidential run. We'll start with Kamala Harris, the incumbent vice president and the Democratic Party nominee. Harris is a trailblazer. She is America's first female vice president, the first vice president of Indian heritage, and also the first black vice president. She's 60 years old and she's already shattered a lot of glass ceilings, and now she's aiming to shatter the biggest one of all. She's trying to be America's first female president. Helping her in this endeavor is her running mate Tim Walz. He's the incumbent governor of the state of Minnesota, a former high school teacher and football coach. This is the Democratic duo trying to make history. Harris came into this presidential race strong. Remember how it happened. Joe Biden was initially the Democratic nominee, but his age and incoherence always weighed him down. It all came to a head during the first presidential debate when Trump wiped the floor with him. The Democrats were despondent, and then came in Kamala Harris, a breath of fresh air. She was young, at 60 years of age, a whole 2 decades younger than Biden. Therefore, she was more energetic. She didn't have trouble finishing sentences, although she can be incoherent too. And she hasn't been caught wandering off or looking in the wrong direction at major events. These may sound like the bare basics, but the Democrats had been starved of this, even this under Joe Biden. So Harris, with her age and energy, was an upgrade for them. Her second big strength is her party line on abortion.
It is a fight for freedom, like the fundamental freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do. And when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom nationwide, as President of the United States, I will proudly sign it into law. Proudly.
Make no mistake, abortion is a major issue, and it could very well carry the Democrats. It has been propping them up for over 2 years now. Between 1973 and 2022, all American women had the right to get an abortion. But that right was struck down by the US Supreme Court in 2022. The Democratic Party has promised to bring back the right to have an abortion and enshrine it in the US Constitution. Harris is very much at the forefront of this cause, which has won her support from women across age groups. Next, let's talk money. This is the US presidential election after all. Money matters a lot, and Harris has raised a lot of it. The Democrats have raised over $1 billion during this presidential campaign. Kamala Harris broke numerous fundraising records. All this money translates into more boots on the ground, more campaign activities, more political ads, the works. It definitely helps push the needle. But will it be enough to hand Harris the White House? Because for all her strengths, she also has a number of weaknesses. We'll start with the baggage. Kamala Harris is the sitting vice president. She's been in the government for almost 4 years now. So everything that has gone wrong under Biden, Harris has had a hand in it. Over the past few years, the US has seen a cost of living crisis, inflation hitting the roof, bringing hardship for ordinary Americans. For these people, their government failed to protect them, and Harris is very much part of that failure. The US economy was a major weakness for the Harris campaign. Another weakness was migration. When Donald Trump was president, illegal immigration into the US was lower. That is a fact. Illegal immigration surged after Biden took over. Biden tried to undo the damage earlier this year, but by then it was already too late. US citizens don't trust Democrats when it comes to securing the southern border. They don't trust Joe Biden, and they don't trust Kamala Harris. Her third weakness is foreign policy, especially the war in Gaza. Arab Americans accuse the Democrats of enabling a genocide against Palestinians by funding Israel. They blame Kamala Harris because she is the sitting vice president. And this is a crucial vote bank. The Democrats have not gained pro-Israel votes to make up for the Arab American votes that they've lost. So Harris will bleed those votes. All these weaknesses are easy to see and exploit.
But over the past 4 years, Americans have suffered one catastrophic failure, betrayal, and humiliation after another. Kamala Harris has delivered soaring prices and economic anguish at home, war and chaos abroad, and nation-destroying invasion on our southern border like nobody's ever seen before. She's actually a disaster.
So what will triumph? Will Kamala Harris's strengths paper over her weaknesses, or will the failures cast a shadow on her positives? We'll know soon enough. We often talk about disruptors, people who shake things up in business or technology. Well, Donald Trump is the ultimate disruptor. I know he's a polarizing figure, but you can't deny his impact. He has completely changed the political playbook. We've been tracking his speeches recently. Listen to how Trump has described America.
Our country is a crooked country, okay? It's a crooked country. The United States is now an occupied country. Can you believe I have to say that? We're an occupied country.
Broken, crooked, and occupied. That's how Trump described the country that he wants to govern. It's the opposite of traditional political wisdom. No other candidate would trash his own country, but Donald Trump does. And yet he's neck and neck with Kamala Harris. Same with legal cases. Trump has been found guilty of dozens of crimes, including sexual assault and fraud. Yet he could be the next president. Do you see the trend here? The normal rule book does not apply to Donald Trump. What hurts normal politicians actually helps him. The question then is how? To understand that, we must look at his past. Trump has been a member of 3 different political parties: the Democrats, the Republicans, and the Reform Party. In the year 2000, he first ran for president. He sought the Reform Party's nomination, but 3 months later, he quit the race. During the Obama presidency, Trump became active again. He was known for conspiracy theories. For example, he said Obama was not born in the United States. Therefore, his election was illegal. No one took him seriously at that point, but American media loved his outlandish style. They gave him a lot of airtime and coverage. Cut to 2016, Trump decided to run again, and this was an important time in US politics. Most voters were angry with the so-called establishment or the mainstream leaders. In the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton won the nomination, but Bernie Sanders came in second, a self-described democratic socialist. On the Republican side, Trump clinched the nomination. Again, an anti-establishment candidate. The rest, as they say, is history. Trump never followed the playbook to enter politics. He ripped up the playbook. And that's why people love him. They feel that he's a political outsider, a billionaire who cannot be corrupted by lobbyists or vested interests or even the media, sort of like a man of the people. Whether that's reality or perception is a different matter altogether, but credit to Trump for creating it. Which brings us to this election. What are Trump's biggest strengths this time? First is that perception that we just talked about, a sort of Teflon coating. Second is the current geopolitical climate. America is involved in 2 full-blown wars. Both conflicts have strained supply chains and increased cost of living. It fits perfectly into Trump's anti-war agenda. He says he will end both wars on day one. Again, no details on how, but people like the idea of ending wars. Trump's third strength is authenticity. Against a candidate like Harris, that counts a lot. She's made a lot of U-turns in her policy positions, whether it's on border deportations or oil drilling or healthcare, but Donald Trump hasn't. If anything, he has doubled down on his extreme policies. And finally, his biggest strength, his economic pitch, the idea of slapping tariffs to protect American industry or keeping migrants out to protect American jobs. I know they sound extreme, but put yourself in the shoes of an average American. Cost of living is high, the border is broken, and job growth is sluggish. Who would you vote for then? The vice president who partially presided over this crisis, or the candidate challenging her? For a lot of Americans, it's a no-brainer. Now we come to the weaknesses. Remember the authenticity we just talked about? Well, that's also a weakness because Trump is authentically racist and misogynistic. So women voters are flocking to Harris. Secondly, his age. As long as Biden was in the race, age was Trump's strength. The moment he dropped out, it became a weakness. Harris is only 60 years old. Donald Trump is 78. His speeches have turned into rambling recently. And he looks visibly worn out. Weakness number 3 is his campaign's ground game. You need people to knock on doors, to make phone calls to potential voters, to help them with voter registration or teach them about early voting. The Democrats have a very large ground presence. Donald Trump does not. He's relying on untested methods. For example, Elon Musk is giving away $1 million to people who register to vote. These strategies do sound good, but they may not be viable. And finally, weakness number 4, his extreme positions may turn away undecided voters and moderates, like his anti-abortion stance, or his call for mass deportation of immigrants, or his refusal to accept election results. Even some Republicans have abandoned Trump because of these positions. Initially, Trump made an effort to correct this. He toned down his abortion rhetoric. He also called himself the father of IVF. But recently, it's back to default, and that may work in Harris's favor. I guess that's the problem with being Donald Trump. Your strengths are also your weaknesses.
So it's the big election in America between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. While there is so much interest in India and around the world as to who will become the next president of the United States, it ultimately boils down to a bunch of swing states, some important communities, whether they show up at the vote or not. We'll also talk about the Indian American community, whether they are overwhelmingly Democrat or they split. Let's try and find a little bit more about this U.S. election, which is being closely watched, with Dhruv Jaishankar, Executive Director with ORF America. Thank you very much, Dhruv, for speaking with us. So, big picture, I mean, we're a day away from Election Day. Just how big is this election? What are the stakes?
It's a big election. It feels like every 4 years there's a big election in the U.S. It's a very divided polity. Roughly 45% of Americans vote Republican, 45% vote Democrat. And really it's only about 5 to 10% whose opinion has to be swayed each election. And the divides are quite deep across age lines, gender lines, cultural lines, rural, urban. I think there's a big divide there. So I think this is playing out again as it is every 4 years.
What do you think it'll boil down to? I mean, in such a close race, is it the swing states? Is it who's motivated more? Is it anti-incumbency? What's the big X factor?
There are lots of X factors, which is what's making it hard to predict. The polls show pretty much a 50-50 split. 7 states will really determine this election. They're called the swing states. I find it hard to believe the winner will not be the winner of Pennsylvania. You think that will be a state that just mathematically, unless many other results go in a very unexpected manner, that's a state that both either candidate will have to win the election.
That's the biggest.
That's the biggest prize.
Swing
the biggest. And the margins are going to be very thin. So ultimately, it'll come down to voter enthusiasm for the two candidates. whether more of Trump supporters come out to vote on election day or whether more of Harris's voters come out. And that will happen tomorrow, and that will really determine the outcome.
So, one interesting thing, and I guess in elections past, other than the 2021, one new phenomenon we've seen is a lot of people are voting early,
Yes.
either by post or by mail-in, by in-person early voting. I think 75 million is the figure that I last checked. That's almost half the electorate.
Yes.
Is there anything in there for us to know that's perhaps the way in which this election is going?
So that has really changed a large part because of COVID. The last election happened during the pandemic, and that led to a lot more early voting. Traditionally, early voting has favored Democrats, and so those are counted later. That suggests that in many states we'll see a blue wave, a Democratic swing later. But it really will depend on a number of other factors. One of the things that's happened this time.
So those were the two main presidential candidates, but today's election is not just about them. America is also voting for its Congress. The Congress is the legislative body. It has a lower house called the House of Representatives and an upper house called the Senate. In this election, all seats in the House of Representatives are up for grabs. That's 435 seats, plus 34 out of 100 seats in the Senate are also being contested. You also have 13 governorships on the ballot. These are for state governors. And a number of state and local level elections are also happening today. When the US has an election, it really goes all out. Right now, I want to focus on one aspect of today's election, that is Indian Americans and their role in American politics. There are two sides to this story, the politicians and the voters. Let's start with the politicians. 9 Indian Americans have their names on the ballot today. All of them are fighting for a seat in the US Congress, in the House of Representatives. Let's go one by one, starting with Suhas Subramaniam. He is a member of the Democratic Party, currently a senator from the state of Virginia, but he's trying to get elected to the House of Representatives today. If he wins, he'll become the first Indian American elected from Virginia and the entire US East Coast. Next, we have the 5 incumbents, 5 Indian Americans who are already members of the House and trying to get re-elected. There's Pramila Jayapal, Amy Bera, Raja Krishnamurthy, Sri Thanedar and Ro Khanna. All 5 of them are Democrats. They've been serving in the House for years and they're looking to extend their tenures. Let's also look at the fresh faces. There's Amish Shah. He's also a Democrat and he is a politician in the state of Arizona. Today he's fighting his first federal election. He's up against a 7-term Republican incumbent. Let's see if he can pull off an upset. Next we have 2 Indian American Republicans, Prashanth Reddy, who's contesting from Kansas, and Rajesh Mohan, standing from New Jersey. Reports say that these 2 Republicans will have a hard time getting elected. But let's see how it goes for them. Perhaps they'll get support from the Indian American community. It may help push them over the line. Because Indian Americans have a growing and influential presence in the US. They have become a key voting demographic. We went down to Fairfax County recently. It's a hub for Indian Americans near Washington, D.C. And here's what we saw. Millions of Indians have made their way to America over the decades. They have made a name for themselves in the business and tech world. Indian Americans are often called the model minority. But this election season, they're also being seen through another lens. They are being seen as a crucial voting bloc, one with the power to influence the final outcome in the presidential race. We are in Fairfax County in the state of Virginia. This is part of the greater Washington area. It's America's national capital region. Now, Fairfax is one of the richest regions in the US and it is home to a large number of Indian immigrants. Some 32,000 Indian Americans live in Fairfax. They make up almost 3% of the population. And in an election as close as this one, 3% can make all the difference. Indian immigrants have made an economic mark in Fairfax over the years. On average, they are better educated and wealthier than any other immigrant group. They're even doing better than US-born citizens. Indian immigrants have a higher rate of home ownership and more incorporated businesses than any other demographic in Fairfax. So you can say that they've been a dominant economic force for a while. And that's the case across most of the US. But now, along with economic power, Indian immigrants also have political power. There are about 5.2 million Indian Americans. This includes both first-generation immigrants and their descendants. About 2.6 million Indian Americans are eligible to vote in this election, and both major parties are vying for their vote. Donald Trump recently put out this tweet on Diwali. Look at the points he's raising. Trump basically says that he's the best man for Hindus, and so Hindu Americans should vote for him. Not all Indian Americans are Hindus, of course, but they are in the majority. So this is a pitch for most of the Indian American vote. Kamala Harris tried to capitalize on Diwali as well, putting out this video to make one last appeal to Indian Americans. Over the course of this presidential campaign, the Democrats have tried their best to capture the Indian American vote. They've been canvassing for months, using slogans like Desis Decide or Desis Vote. The Democrats have been active in all the swing states in particular.
You can make the difference in this election. Please sign up with Indian American Impact. You can go to desipresident.com. Sign up right now to get engaged. Let's win this election.
The registration site is desipresident.com, a not-so-subtle highlighting of Kamala Harris's ethnicity. The Democrats have also roped in prominent Indian American celebrities, like former Top Chef host Padma Lakshmi, who campaigned door-to-door in Pennsylvania. It was an all-out blitz by the Democratic Party. But despite all this effort, they've been bleeding Indian American votes. A nationwide survey of Indian Americans was conducted recently in the weeks leading up to the election, and the results are disappointing for Democrats. Indian Americans have historically leaned towards the Democratic Party, but the new survey shows a slight shift towards Donald Trump. In the 2020 election, 68% of Indian Americans said they would vote Democrat for Joe Biden. Only 22% said they would vote for Trump. This time, the gap has reduced. About 60% say they would vote for Harris. That's a significant increase for the Republicans. And in such a close race, it could power them to the White House. Indian Americans have historically leaned towards the Democrats. Most of them still do. But of late, Donald Trump and the Republicans have made some gains. And the biggest reason for that is illegal immigration. Take the example of Fairfax County. It is home to a lot of Indian immigrants. Most of them came here legally. And they've had to wait for years for their citizenship papers to be processed. Some of them are still waiting. So they're upset. The people who came to America legally, they're upset with the Democrats for failing to control the borders. Illegal immigration was rampant for the last 3 years. Tens of thousands were crossing the border every month and getting benefits that legal migrants had to wait years for. This turned some immigrant communities against the Democrats. Some Indian Americans too. They believe that Donald Trump is the better choice when it comes to securing America's southern border, which is why thousands of Indian Americans will be voting Republican for the first time. Will this prove to be Kamala Harris's undoing? We'll find out in a few hours. Foreign policy plays a key role in most elections, but this one has been a bit different. Kamala Harris barely talked about geopolitics until the last few days. That's when she suddenly started talking about a ceasefire in Gaza. Any guesses why? To woo the Arab American votes. Many of these voters have abandoned Harris because of Joe Biden's support to Israel, and Donald Trump is looking to capitalize. On the other side, American Jews are also a strong voting bloc. Here in Washington, both communities have a sizable presence, their own cultural centers, their own places of worship, and their own political preferences. We decided to find out what those preferences are. It's crunch time for American voters. They're heading out to elect their next president. We can guess what's on their mind as they queue up. Maybe abortion, or inflation, or healthcare.
Killing children is
But for some voters, it's a war being fought thousands of kilometers away. Israel's war on Gaza. Arabs and Jews are influential blocs in America. There are 3.7 million Arab Americans and 5.8 million Jewish Americans. In an election of close margins, their support is crucial. Yes, domestic issues matter to them, but so does the war in West Asia, especially to Arab Americans who feel that Joe Biden is enabling Israel. You may wonder, what can Biden do? Doesn't the responsibility lie with Israel? Well, on paper, yes, it does. But do remember, American presidents have a lot of leverage over Israel. In the past, they've brokered peace deals between Israel and the Arab world. It was right here in these White House lawns that in the 1990s, then President Bill Clinton hosted the leaders of Israel and Palestine. It was also here that Donald Trump brokered the Abraham Accords. So the voters have a legitimate question in their minds. If those presidents could do it, why not Joe Biden? Arab Americans have traditionally voted for Democrats, but maybe not this time. Polls say 42% of them back Donald Trump, only 41% back Kamala Harris. Here at the Islamic Center in Washington, that shift is clear. This is among the oldest mosques in the city. Opened way back in 1952 by then President Eisenhower. Amid Washington's Greco-Roman cityscape, this traditional Mamluk style stands out. Years ago, these worshippers would have voted for Democrats, but not anymore.
Americans have been in a gridlock for decades, and they keep thinking that the Democrats are going to save them. We were pushed to vote for Biden in 2020, and look what he did. He's the one perpetrating the genocide. So for the record, the Gazan genocide will go down in history as being under Democratic leadership and not Republican leadership.
I have found that President Trump has been slightly more effective in reaching Muslim and Arab leaders. He's been a little bit more doubtful about pursuing war and pursuing more violent approaches to these kinds of problems.
It's not as much about liking Trump, it's more about punishing the Democrats. But Trump will take it. In some of the swing states, Arab vote could be crucial. Perhaps the difference between winning and losing, like Michigan, for instance. The state is home to more than 200,000 Arab Americans. Trump won it by 10,000 votes in 2016. He lost it by 150,000 votes in 2020. This time again, he senses an opportunity. Days before voting, Trump visited Dearborn in Michigan, often called the Arab capital of America. And his message there, that he will end the war.
We're going to bring peace. You're going to have peace in the Middle East, but not with the clowns that you have running the U.S. right now. You're going to have peace. You're going to have peace in the Middle East.
So Trump is making inroads among Arabs. What about Jews? They too have traditionally voted for Democrats. This is the Sixth and I Synagogue in Washington, D.C., among the oldest in the city. It was inaugurated way back in 1908. Then in the year 2005, the 43rd President of the US, George Bush, attended a special dinner here. A year before that, he'd made minor inroads into the Jewish vote bank, which was until then considered impossible for a Republican candidate to do. Now, almost a decade later, Donald Trump is pulling out all the stops. He says that Kamala Harris is anti-Jew, even though she's married to one. He has met the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at his home in Florida. As president, he moved the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But despite all these efforts, he's not getting much success. Surveys say that 71%, more than 71% Jews in swing states say that they will vote Harris. Many people have speculated why this happens. Republicans support Israel to the hilt, yet Jews back Democrats. Some say it's because Jews feel closer to democratic liberal values. Others point to neo-Nazis in Trump's camp. Anti-Semitism has risen 360% since the Hamas attack last year. So American Jews are rightly worried. In 2020, they put Joe Biden over the line. They helped him win. In the key swing state of Pennsylvania, there are 300,000 Jews. Biden won the state by just 82,000 votes. In 2016, Trump won by just 44,000 votes. So both these communities matter. If you look at the top issues in this election, it's abortion or inflation or democracy. But these alone will not determine the outcome. A few thousand Arab or Jewish votes could put Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the White House. The Arab voters want to punish the Democrats for supporting Israel, and the Jewish voters continue to support the Democrats despite Donald Trump's outreach. So in a lot of ways, Joe Biden's shadow looms large over this election, even though he's pulled out. His failures have alienated the Arab voters, and Kamala Harris may end up paying the price for it. Like with most elections these days, the one in America is also the target of a massive disinformation campaign. Let me show you two videos. This is the first one. It says it is from Pennsylvania, more specifically from Buck County. It shows an official sorting through mail-in ballots. He then rips up the votes cast for Donald Trump. The video soon went viral. It garnered 6 million views on X. Republicans cried fraud, but election officials acted fast. They debunked this in less than 3 hours. They said the video was fake. The ballots shown were not authentic. The second video is this one. It shows a group of black men. They say they are from Haiti. They came to America 6 months ago. That's what they say. The men then show multiple driver licenses. They say they've already voted once for Harris and now they're heading to vote again. This video is just 20 seconds long. It was viewed thousands of times on X and other social media platforms. Officials soon called it fake. It was later removed from the platforms. But here's the problem. These videos, once uploaded, spread like wildfire. You can debunk them, you can take them down, but they sow mistrust in the election process. And who's behind them? According to the FBI, it's Moscow. After all, what would a US election be without some Russian misinformation? The FBI says Russian actors are behind all of this. They manufacture the videos. They then amplify them. The paid actors used are often black. So clearly, there's also a racism angle here. That's according to American intelligence agencies. Washington says the goal is quite simple. It's not to boost any party or candidate. It's to undermine confidence in the entire electoral process. And there are several groups behind it. They have the same modus operandi. Claim voter fraud, create discord in battleground states, and show how the election is being rigged. Of course, the Kremlin has denied all of it. It says the claims are baseless. Moscow says it does not interfere in the elections of other countries.
It is obvious that these accusations have never been well-founded, that somehow prove, or at least try to confirm, that Russia has something to do with them. This is why this accusation is unfounded, and we reject it completely.
So Washington is worried about Russia. It calls Moscow the most active threat. But they also need to look within. Like this report, it's by the Center for Countering Digital Hate. It says Elon Musk and his platform X are at the center of US election misinformation. Basically, most of the fake news is coming from there. The report says that X constantly pushes misinformation, especially in the key swing states. Leading the charge is Elon Musk himself. The report flagged 87 of his posts. All of them pushed misinformation. Collectively, they were viewed 2 billion times. 2 billion. From conspiracy theories to misleading ads, Musk is pushing all of it, and his platform X is amplifying it. It tells you how prevalent fake news is in this election, and it's not just about fake news. Like I said, it's also about the amplification of sporadic incidents. You see, every election has isolated incidents like mail-in ballots burning this time. But their videos are shared 1 million times to amplify allegations of cheating. So misinformation is prevalent, real news is being blown out of proportion, and this is a major problem. Election officials have a lot on their plate, especially in the battleground states, but now they also have to counter the fake news. All of this creates an ecosystem of distrust, and the US will feel the repercussions of this long beyond just the voting day. Last time, it took more than 3 days to declare a winner. By some estimates, this year could be the same or longer, which means this deluge of misinformation will continue in the days to come. Now let's talk about money. This election is awash with cash, that too on an unprecedented scale. The 2024 presidential race may be the costliest in US history, with a spending of about $16 billion. $16 billion. A large chunk of this is campaign spending, which involves costs for staffing, travel, media, merchandise, and some over-the-top ideas. From Kamala Harris's face plastered on the 366 feet tall Las Vegas Sphere to Donald Trump's massive expenditure on social media influencers. Apart from campaign spending, conducting elections is an expensive business in itself. In the US, administrative costs run into billions of dollars. All of this together makes up the election economy. So where does it stand? How much money has been spent and where? Here's a report.
Elections are an expensive business anywhere in the world. But in the US, money plays a bigger role than it does in other countries. First, because campaigns are unusually long, there is no legal limit to the US campaign season. And secondly, because there is no legal limit to campaign spending either. Research shows that candidates who spend more money usually win. So political campaigns are getting more expensive in the US. In 2020, election spending totaled to $15.1 billion. In 2024, at least $15.9 billion have been spent. The 2024 presidential race is on track to be the costliest in the country's history, mostly thanks to the candidates, Democrat Kamala Harris and Republican Donald Trump. They have raised an extraordinary amount of money, and spent it too. Democrats have outspent Republicans $5 billion to $4.1 billion. With billions of dollars to spend, campaigns have had a lot of decisions to make. Most of the focus has been on the swing states like Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Nevada. These states are being inundated with political ads and door-to-door campaigns. But overall, campaign spending has been focused on 9 types of expenditures: administrative, consulting, digital, field, fundraising, media, polling, travel, and others. This includes money spent on selling merchandise. Trump merchandise worth $140 million has been sold. Meanwhile, Harris has sold items worth around $26 million. But remember, she entered the picture only a few months ago. Now, coming back to the list, consulting involved spending large sums of money to build giant databases to help answer questions like who will support the candidates and what messaging will reach them. Contacting potential donors was also an expensive affair, but media has been the biggest expense for both campaigns. Since March, the 2 presidential campaigns have spent $2.1 billion on advertising, out of which Harris alone has spent $1.1 billion, which is more than the GDP of 14 countries in the world. Harris and Trump also poured millions into social media influencers, who flooded conventions of both the parties. Harris and Trump splashed out on some other costly endeavors as well, like the giant projection of Kamala Harris's face on the Las Vegas Sphere. It cost $450,000 a day for what is believed to be the first political ad to appear on the 516-foot wide and 366-foot tall attraction. Meanwhile, Trump booked expensive primetime spots during games which involved Pennsylvania's 2 professional NFL teams. But swanky presidential marketing ideas aside, it is not just the campaigns that make the election economy. It's also the cost of conducting an election. In the US, presidential elections are decentralized. City and county level administrations make sure that the election goes smoothly. So it is the state governments who are responsible for administration costs, which involve costs for staffing, technology, security, supplies, voter registration rolls, and according to research, it costs anywhere between $2 to $3 billion to conduct the US elections. So elections are expensive business. In the US, this year they've been costlier than ever. And in a few hours, Americans will find out if they will suffer from buyer's remorse.
So it's the big election in America between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. While there is so much interest in India and around the world as to who will become the next president of the United States, it ultimately boils down to a bunch of swing states, some important communities, whether they show up at the vote or not. We'll also talk about the Indian American community, whether they are overwhelmingly Democrat or they split. Let's try and find a little bit more about this US election, which is being closely watched, with Dhruv Jayashankar, Executive Director with ORF America. Thank you very much, Dhruv, for speaking with us. So, big picture, I mean, we're a day away from Election Day. Just how big is this election? What are the stakes?
It's a big election. It feels like every 4 years there's a big election in the US. It's a very divided polity. Roughly 45% of Americans vote Republican, 45% vote Democrat. And really it's only about 5 to 10% whose opinion has to be swayed each election. And the divides are quite deep across age lines, gender lines, cultural lines, rural, urban. I think there's a big divide there. So I think this is playing out again, as it is every 4 years.
What do you think it'll boil down to? I mean, in such a close race, is it the swing states? Is it who's motivated more? Is it anti-incumbency? What's the big X factor?
There are lots of X factors, which is what's making it hard to predict. The polls show pretty much a 50-50 split. 7 states will really determine this election. They're called the swing states. I find it hard to believe the winner will not be the winner of Pennsylvania. I think that will be a state that just mathematically, unless many other results go in a very unexpected manner, that's a state that both either candidate will have to win the election.
That's the biggest.
That's the biggest prize.
Swing
The biggest. And the margins are going to be very thin. So ultimately, it'll come down to voter enthusiasm for the two candidates. Whether more of Trump supporters come out to vote on Election Day, or whether more of Harris's voters come out. And that will happen tomorrow, and that will really determine the outcome.
So, one interesting thing, and I guess in elections past, other than the 2021, one new phenomenon we're seeing is a lot of people are voting early,
yes,
either by post or by mail-in, by in-person early voting. I think 75 million is the figure that I last checked. That's almost half the electorate.
Yes.
Is there anything in there for us to know that's perhaps the way in which this election is going?
So that has really changed a large part because of COVID. The last election happened during the pandemic, and that led to a lot more early voting. Traditionally, early voting has favored Democrats, and so those are counted later. That suggests that in many states we'll see a blue wave, a Democratic swing later. But it really will depend on a number of other factors. One of the things that's happened this time is this signs that more Republicans are voting early.
Okay.
So the balance may not be as skewed towards Democrats as in the past. But again, we'll only know after counting is completed.
Let's talk a little bit about the Indian American community. There's about 2.5 million of them. Generally they've been sort of Democrat leaning. This time, are you seeing anything different?
So traditionally about 2/3 are registered Democrats, about 25% are registered Republicans.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Viral Thai hippo Mu Deng predicts an election win for Donald Trump. Kamala Harris's ancestral village in India's Tamil Nadu prays for her election victory, and Americans in Paris make up for missing the election by casting mock votes. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1940, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected for an unprecedented third term as US President. He is the only US President to serve more than 2 terms. In fact, he ended up serving 4. Roosevelt's unprecedented tenure led to the ratification of the 22nd Amendment, which capped presidential terms at 2. With that, it's a wrap on this show. But the action is just getting started here in Washington, D.C. The next 24 hours are crucial for America. By tomorrow, this time, we should have a winner. But that's only if everything goes to plan. We'll be tracking all the updates for the next 48 hours, getting you all the latest news. So stay tuned to First Post for our continuous coverage of the US presidential election.
Well, it is 12:30 here in Washington, D.C. We're coming to you live from